were the images that came up to me. And these, like I say, it was quite chilling and quite ominous when you look at these pictures in the context that we're in now. And so it just made me think that this year that I have to take some responsibility. And so this is what I'm promoting for this year. These are all the things we want, please, universe, if you're listening. We want everything from me now, all my pictures, absolute positivity, nothing else. And this, it will be so, especially the unicorns, they're definitely on their way. So before I go any further and I get into the updates and the bits and pieces you need to know around finance, I think it was really important, and I know Sam's already said this, but I thought it was so important to give you such a big thank you, the most colourful, flowery thank you that I could find. I do not underestimate what you're all doing out there. It is, when I see the guidance coming through and all the things that you're having to just respond to, and it's been going on for a long time now, so I'm sure that it's feeling relentless as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for all the, I have conversations with lots of you all the time. Always in awe of some of the things, the conversations you're having to have with families in real desperate need, the food parcels, the risk assessments, just everything, the whole everything that's being thrown at you, and I'm absolutely inspired by the way you're all responding to it, and there's really very little word of complaint. There's sort of acknowledgement of what's going on, but it's just, well, we've got to get on with it, and we've got to do it. And I think the big old dollop of goodwill that's going into keeping the systems running at the moment should not be underestimated, and I just hope that you all really have a sense of what a great job that you're doing. And as Sam said, as a parent of children in school and seeing the other side of it, I can only really take my hat off to you as to how much you're doing. So thank you for everything you're doing, and I hope you really get a sense of what a difference you're making. So a quick roundup. I feel like I'm repeating myself in lots of sessions when I come and speak to you these days, but I think given everything that's going on and the amount that's being thrown at you, it doesn't hurt for us just to recap, have a little sense of where things are. Have I missed anything? I know I get quite a few emails saying, have I missed this? Has something come out on this? Quite often the case is no, it's just we're waiting for lots of things and lots of confirmation a lot of the time, so it's easy to think surely someone should have said something on that, and they haven't half the time. So I didn't think it would hurt just to go through where we are in terms of COVID and the finance and things you need to know. So this is just a quick roundup of where things are. So you will all you're all looked at around the exceptional funding that was available for the first phase of lockdown. That whole claims process and everything, the windows for that are all closed now, and there is nothing else to claim under those particular that particular sort of that funding that was announced around those particular very specific items that were funded. The thing that will probably fall into a very similar claims process is the update we've had around free school meals in the beginning of this year. That was fun for a couple of weeks, wasn't it? All the free school meal stuff that was going backwards and forwards. So we've obviously got the situation now that we're in another lockdown, which is going on a little bit longer as of yesterday, and we've got the free school meals. Finally got some clarity around the free school meals and what will and won't be funded. So you've now got the option of making decision of what's in the best interests of the children in your school, and you will be able to reclaim the costs associated with that. So we don't know what that claims process is as yet, but I expect it will be very similar to the exceptional claims funding. If you are using vouchers, the National Voucher Scheme is the simplest way to do it, in that you don't have to pay anything up front. You order the vouchers, they're paid for centrally. There's no cash moving out of your school that you then have to reclaim. So I would point you towards the national scheme for that, because just for that reason, that the financial risk is not there for you. Even though we have assurances that that's all reclaimable, it's just having to go through that process of reclaim. It is taken out of the mix if you use that national scheme. I know there's been a lot of confusion in the system because it's wider. We've got the Hugger vouchers, we've got Eden Red, we've got the school, the food parcels. It's true there was a lot of confusion, particularly at the beginning of this year around that. Just as by way of explanation, the hug system is covering the school meals over the holidays. When the free school meal availability was extended to the holidays, there was a recognition, obviously, that schools are not funded to provide that. Schools are funded to provide free school meals in term time. They're not funded to provide free school meals in the holidays. Therefore, the funding stream for that came through to local authorities to administer. So basically, local authorities were given what was called a winter COVID grant, and that was to cover more than just free school meals. It was to really just deal with real sort of problems, people in really vulnerable positions over the winter period. As part of that scheme, a major part of that scheme was to provide for free school meals, and in East Sussex that has been done via the Hug voucher scheme, and that's where East Sussex are going in and loading values onto the system for you to administer and to give those free school meal vouchers out. In term time, it's a national scheme funded in a very different way and run by the DfE and not run locally. That's why there's two systems in place, and it is frustrating. It's confusing for parents and it's confusing for everybody, and it means you have to set yourself up on two systems and have two systems going. That's the explanation for it. I can't make it any easier, I'm afraid, but it's just really to do with where the funding is coming from and who's administering it. So for the half-term holiday, you will go back to the Hug vouchers. That's how free school meals will be provided. But in term time, it's whatever you're doing in the best interests of your pupils, whether that's the food parcels, whether it's vouchers, or whatever other system you've got in place. Again, there will be, in terms of the claims for the free school meals amounts, we don't know what the details are. You will be able to claim £3.50 per child per week for if you're providing food parcels, and you can claim up to £15 for the vouchers. That's what we know. That's been confirmed. In terms of how that will happen, we will pass on further details as and when we get those. Another fund that was announced just before Christmas, and I think when I try and read all the guidance so that I can get a sense of try and highlight those kind of key points to you. This is the Workforce Fund, and it's aimed at schools who don't have huge reserves and they're experiencing high levels, or they experienced high levels of absence in that period where schools were fully open from November to December. Actually, that this is what the fund covers. So it was a recognition of schools finding themselves sometimes in very difficult situations with staffing and having to cover staff to keep schools open, and it was a way of just giving some reassurance that there would be some funding. Now, in terms of guidance, this is quite a complicated one to read to sort of really understand if you're eligible or not. So you really do kind of have to look at this. The general guidance is if you're expecting to have fairly low reserves, which is less than 4% carry forward on your total income, your annual income for a year, and if your teacher absence rate is over 20% on any given day, or over 10% over a period of 15 days. So it's a fairly complex thing. You can't just go, yep, we're eligible. You have to kind of have a think about it and have a look at where you were for that period. It only covers November to December. That's the period that's been identified with this fund. Again, we don't have any claim details on how that will work, just that this is what will be covered, and when we get more details about how you actually claim that, we can send those through to you. Special schools have a slightly different sort of criteria that's applied, but essentially it's sort of along the similar lines, of slightly different percentages and thresholds involved. So I think the only way, if you think you may fall into that criteria, the only way to really check that out is to read the guidance, because like I say, there's some very specific criteria and details in there. But I think if you had high levels of staff absence, so like I say, in that sort of 20% range, either on a particular day or 10% over a longer period of time, then it's worth having a look and seeing if you can make a claim there if your reserves are particularly low as well. It's worth saying it's just a case of the detail in that one that you kind of need to be aware of. There is an option to claim for support staff under this fund as well, which is a strange one, but the eligibility is based on teacher absence. The whole sort of drive behind this was the fact that you had to hire those staff to keep the school open. So it may be that you had to hire support staff to have a person there. You weren't necessarily covering for a teacher. but it's the teacher absence rate that's important in terms of eligibility. So it's kind of a little complex, that one, but I think if you know you're kind of in that realm of you might qualify, it's worth looking at the detail there. And then we've got the catch-up premium. I know this is playing on everyone's mind a little bit at the moment, because you've got this money sitting there and you know there's more to come, and you maybe haven't been able to do with it what you were intending to do because of how things have changed, and now we're in a lockdown. It's an academic year grant you've already received or nearly received, most of it for this year, so this financial year, for maintained schools anyway, and then there will be another £33 coming in the summer term. When you look at the guidance and around the new lockdown, there is some sort of impetus to be doing what you can with it right now, but it's difficult to know. It's a separate grant, so I mean, I know lots of people are asking me about clawback of this, and will we be able to carry it forward. I mean, I can only assume yes, because it's a grant that's been awarded for a particular purpose, which is to catch up pupils. Now, those pupils are going to be needing catch up whenever they get back, and we don't know when that's going to be for real, and whenever you're going to be able to do this work. So I can't imagine that there'll be a clawback. But like I say, this is a grant that's it's a separate grant with its own conditions, essentially. There's no mention of clawback or carry forwards specifically. It's been awarded for this academic year, and so the intention of any of these grants when they're awarded for a particular year is that they're used in that year for the pupils that are with you then. But we're in such exceptional circumstances, and this is going to be needed. So I can't imagine that's going to be there's going to be any change there. But who am I to say? In these times of uncertainty, we don't know anything until anything's officially announced. But I would imagine, all I would say to you is if you've got balances of that are being carried forward, just make sure you know what they are, how much they are, and you've got them clearly ring fenced and got them clearly identified in your budgets for next year that they need to be spent in a particular way. And that's the best we can do ultimately at this point. We've obviously had some concerns around early years funding at the beginning of term as well. It's another comes along with free school meals as to the sort of tenseness around funding at the beginning of the year. So we had this early indication that early years funding would be coming through on actual attendance rather than as it had been before on kind of previous years numbers. That was fairly quickly updated to say, when the lockdown came into place, to say that there would be some sense of, if a child could have been expected to have been attending, then they could be counted in the census numbers. Now, I know there's still some concerns over this because of whether you're offering full places to all people, to all children, and I know there's still this is still causing schools some difficulties, and it's just one of those kind of difficult areas really in terms of early years. But essentially the announcement that sort of widened out the census numbers that came after the original announcement did make more sense for most people, but I know there's still some of you struggling out there with those numbers. Pupil premium is another one. There's nothing changing necessarily in that apart from the basis, which is fairly fundamental. The pupil premium has always been based, the amount of pupil premium you would get has always been traditionally based on your January census, with some sort of recognition that people move in and out of schools, and January was seen as a better basis for that. That has been changed back to October for this year, and now I can only assume that's just in response to the fact that there probably are a lot more people qualifying, and the impact of that really just has to be kind of assessed before the sort of movement can be moved there to really. I mean, it's just there's going to be kind of quite a shift there. So at the moment that it is on October census number. So if you've got people qualifying for free school meals after October, they won't be counted in that for your pupil premium. So that's worth just being aware of. There are various other bits and pieces of support which are all a bit piecemeal in some ways, and tend to be being aimed directly at schools now, and cutting out the local authorities certainly in terms of how they're being administered. So we have not so much sort of sight over what's actually happening. So there's various technology things with laptops being provided. Again, that's whereas the local authority were involved in the first phase of that tends to be schools dealing direct with that now. There's also some grants around helping get remote learning up and running. And some various things around data and modems and that kind of thing. So there's various little schemes there for individuals, getting individuals up and running with technology, essentially. There was some, I don't know how much that this was actually impacted anybody, but there was some support around any costs associated with autumn exams that had to take place in place of the summer exams that happened. Again, I've got no real sense of how much that has impacted anybody, but there was some funding available for there if people qualified. We've also got mentor and tutoring schemes, which is linked in with the catch-up premium. Now, this is where schools can access subsidised support around tutoring and mentors. It's not free. It's subsidised, heavily subsidised, but it isn't free. There is a cost to schools for that, but it's there, and it's aimed at these catch-up activities. Obviously a little bit paused at the moment to a certain extent. And then the furlough scheme, so schools have been able to access that to a very minimal amount in terms of whether if you've got private income that has disappeared as a result of COVID, there are opportunities to furlough. The rules around furlough have become flexible as the time's gone on, in that you can, you don't have to identify specifically staff that just work related to private income. There's some sort of flexibility around percentages. You can part furlough people. So if you do feel like there is some scope there for you to furlough staff, it is worth looking into, just to make sure that you can recoup anything, because the drop in private income is really hitting some schools really hard. So it's worth just doing all you can to minimise the impact of that. So that's a roundup of where we are, a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour of COVID, and hopefully none of that's desperately new to you. It's just a good sort of overview of where things are. So in addition to that, just to sort of highlight to you, this is nothing new to you, and it's something that you already know about. You've got it in your budgets already. It's been paid out. Is basically the local authority you have a little earlier this year reviewed some of those pots that would have been distributed to you a bit later in the year, but certainly around November time, a real sense, I think, in the same way that workforce fund was announced, there was this real sense of some schools are really struggling here with everything they're having to do, and covering staff, and the finances here are really under stress, and not knowing how long it's going to go on for was really causing some concern around budgeting. So at that point, we took a decision to review some of those pots that sometimes get to the end of the year and they haven't been allocated for whatever reason, because of the amounts, because of the way they're allocated and the formulas that are applied, and they haven't all been needed at a certain point in time. They were reviewed a little earlier, so you knew that they were coming, so that you kind of knew that there was something to contribute to these costs. So we had the unspent growth fund. So the growth fund is held as this very small, really relatively small amount of money that's held back from the school's pot, if you like, which is very specific. It does all go out to schools eventually, but it goes out in a slightly different way than the formula, and it's aimed at sort of the key stage 1 top-ups and any sort of additional classes and growth schools that are growing, and where the funding is kind of lagging behind it, and it gives some support there. Very specific rules around that, and if you qualify, that you get it. That is reviewed. It's just taken as a pot, and then if it's reviewed from time to time, if that pot hasn't all been needed, it then gets distributed out to schools as a whole, if it's not required. So that was reviewed, and so all schools and academies have received a payment related to unused growth fund. You may or may not remember, over the last couple of years we've had the term time only contract adjustments, which created a financial liability across all schools and academies around back pay. At the time, that was dealt with in East Sussex by a central pot that was held for that reason, in agreement with Schools Forum. It was held to sort of fund these the back pay element and the pension liabilities that were associated with that. Now, we've got so far with that project, quite a lot of those payments have gone out. Not everything is resolved as yet, but the review of the amount of funds that were held back was seen as to be, there was enough scope to release some of that now out to schools and academies. Eventually, this will all come out to schools and academies, but we have to obviously keep the liability, the amount of liability. So that's that. All schools and academies received a payment from that just before Christmas time. For primary schools that buy into the supply insurance, again, there was a review of the balance. That's basically, it's like a self-assurance scheme, really, that schools pay in a certain amount to be part of that insurance scheme, and a balance builds up, and obviously it's drawn on when people have to call on that insurance, and that was seen, that was reviewed to see where the balance is, and it was assessed that some of that could be released out to schools. Obviously, that's only gone back to schools that paid into that scheme in the first place. And again, we have every year maintained schools agree to de-delegate a certain amount of funds for contingency, so that when schools find themselves in very specific financial situations, there is a contribution that can be made from this contingency pot. That was reviewed. It's reviewed at certain points in the year, and a larger amount of it was released a little bit earlier this year, just so that you knew you had it and it wasn't coming at the end of the year so much. So that's stuff that you should already have. You've already had those payments out, but it's just to let you know that that's how that worked. So looking forward, we always have a little review at this time of year of funding for next year and what things are looking like and what you can expect. So I could put this graph up most years, I think, just to sort of let you know how it's all working. So as the local authority, we receive a dedicated schools grant, and this basically covers everything education in East Sussex. That's schools, funding for schools and academies, special schools, high needs top-ups, early years places, and some central functions that apply to schools and academies are funded out of that as well. So there's sort of 4 blocks that this comes to us. That pie chart you've got there accounts for next year for about £415 million. So there's a lot of money tied up there. The big chunk of that is what's making up your individual school budgets, and that is, as I say, entirely distributed to schools, either via the formula, the 99.9% of it via the formula, and a tiny slither that goes out via the growth fund that I talked about earlier. In terms of what that looks like, what does that look like year on year? So we've got £25 million more allocated to East Sussex and schools block. That sounds like a lot of money. A big chunk of that, £13.5 million, is because the teachers' pay and pension grants now that were provided to schools in the past as separate amounts are now rolled up into that schools block of funding. So the formula that you've received, the formula budget that you've received, your GAG or your budget share, now includes the teachers' pension and pay grants. So that's, every chance I get to say this, just remember that's already included. Don't add additional income into your budgets for that. You will not be getting separate amount of money. It's already included in your base budgets now. 11.2 million was due, of that increase of that 25 million was due to increase in funding factors. So that's where in the formula this year the funding factors have all increased by 4%, and the impact of that increase is this £11 million that's more that's come through. And then there's a very small movement mainly to do with the fact that pupil numbers have moved between phases, and different amounts of money gets attracted by pupils in different phases. So we're still in the situation where the local authority receives money for schools based on the national funding formula, and that's how the pot's sort of decided how much we get, and then it's distributed out using our local formula, which is very, very similar to the national funding formula. So we're in a position where the formulas are very similar now. So what you want to know is what do I get out of this? It's all very well, these 25 millions and 414 millions, but what does that mean for my school? This sums up what we're doing at the moment. Kirsten very eagerly, she just loves getting the, we have to sort of produce a spreadsheet basically that says this is how we're allocating money this year in East Sussex. So that goes to the DFE to be checked and balanced and make sure that we're doing everything like we should be in according with the rules that are laid down, and then we get the, yeah, that's fine, you can go ahead. Kirsten very keenly got that in 2.5 weeks early in the hope that we'll be able to get this out to you early, and we have found out yesterday that they haven't looked at it yet, so we are still waiting on that one, and we're always waiting at this time of the year. We do aim to get that out to you in the first week in February, but we cannot press the button until the DFE say it's okay to go. So it's all ready to go, we're just waiting, and as soon as we know, we will send it out to the maintained schools. I believe that the DFE send that out directly in February as well. well to academies, so we should all be hearing at a similar time how much money will be allocated for next year. Certainly for maintained schools, you should, if you submitted to us your latest October census figures, we did ask if you wanted a bit more of an updated idea of where you might be. We did send out some indications in December time, so hopefully you've got a fairly good idea of where things are going to be anyway. That should be fairly accurate, although it will be slightly different because we just don't have all the information at that point in time. So as well as your individual allocations, we have the various grants, and I know there's lots of questions around these as well, particularly sports grant. I know there's this very kind of there's this sort of a question mark hanging over the 1920 sports grant that schools are holding on to and weren't able to spend, and the DfE granted you a little bit of extra time to spend that by the end of March, and now we're in another lockdown, and schools in some cases are still struggling to spend that money. We've asked the question from the DfE as to whether that still stands in terms of that deadline. They said it does at the moment, although it's being reviewed, so I can't tell you any more on that. I mean, ultimately, if you can't spend it, you can't spend it. And again, I would say you keep your records, you know what your balances are, you know how much is ring fenced, you know how much, if the money had to go, you know what it's been allocated to. But at the moment, I've got no indication. Also with sports grant, again, same position we were in last year. We don't have any guarantee whether it will carry on for the next year. We know it will come to the end of this academic year, but we don't know any further than that. So there's a little uncertainty around that, which I know causes frustration because you've got certain contracts tied up with that money. But it's worth being aware of where that's being spent, and that it's ring fenced, and that what would have to go if the grant goes. So I just highlight that. Again, pupil premium, we've already mentioned that's now being based on the January numbers, rather on the October numbers rather than January numbers, and catch-up premium again. In terms of how much you're carrying forward for any of these things, just keep it well detailed, that you know how much you've got in these particular pots, and so that they can be separated out from your sort of general funds, if you like, so you can see where they sit. Now, this is always the best part of the presentation. I've been able to do this for a couple of years now. Good news for everybody is that there will be an extra distribution of income in April. This is for schools and academies, of £52.59 per pupil. This will be on top of your budget share, your GAG allocation. It's not part of that. It's an additional funding that's being released from that central block. When we looked at that pie chart earlier, you see there's a little sliver called the central services block. Basically, there's been a lot of work over a few years of rationalising down the spending in that area. But basically, once that's allocated to the local authority, that it's all part of the dedicated schools grant. So whatever doesn't get spent there can be allocated out to schools and academies. So over a number of years, there's been quite a lot of concerted effort on that, to sort of work through the system on that, which means that's why for the last couple of years we've been able to give this sort of extra payment out. So next year in April you will receive an income payment of £52.59 per pupil from this distribution. Like I say, it will be a separate income amount. It's not part of your budget, and every school and academy will receive that. So a little bit of good news in amongst everything else. Oh, look, I put some animation on that. I forgot about it. Just wanted to also mention the pay freeze that's been announced, that you will be acutely aware of, although I always think it's funny when I'm talking to this group of people that we're probably amongst the few people that go, oh good, there's a pay freeze, that'll make the budgeting easier. We're not going to get a pay rise this year, good. I'm sure it's not quite like that, but sometimes sometimes I think, oh, well, that'll make things easier. So a pay freeze announced, public sector pay freeze, almost, in that less than 24,000, if anyone earning less than 24,000 will receive some payment, whatever form that will take, of at least £250. So there will be some pay rises in. Now, we recognised when we were putting together the budget planning tool and trying to decide, well, what on earth do we put into the assumptions for the pay awards, that schools, probably more than most, have quite a high proportion of staff earning less than 24,000. You've got a lot of staff in those support areas that aren't earning more than that. So therefore, the percentage increases may be slightly more significant than zero in terms of this pay freeze. So I just wanted to highlight to you those assumptions that are built into the planning tool for anyone who, well, all the maintained schools that are using that anyway. These are what we've built in. You know, I know as much as you do on this one as to how this is going to go. For teachers, we have built in nothing because that's the indication there will be no pay rise this year. And for the following 2 years, we've put it back up to 3% because there is still this commitment that teachers, the starting salary for teachers will go to £30,000, and that's something that we talked about this time last year. We were talking about how that was going to phase in, and if you remember, we'll see, and we have seen this year, the way there's been some fairly hefty increases to make that possible, and the plan was that was to happen over the next 3 years. Now obviously with this pay freeze that delays that. Now the indication is that will continue as soon as it can, but obviously, you know, as things become more and more uncertain and pressure on public finances we don't know what's going to happen with that. So, but at the moment we're assuming that programme will continue as of next year, so we've put that back up to 3% again because that's seen as the average increase that you would see overall, based on those increases going through. For unqualified teachers, we've put a 1% increase for this year because some of those unqualified teachers do fall under the £24,000, so there will be some impact there. And we've put the 3% on for the next 2 years. Now with support staff, we've split them into whether they fall above or below the 24,000, and we've applied percentages as described there. Like I say, this is very generalised and it's an estimate, and things will be different. There'll be all sorts of negotiations. We won't know anything until the pay scales are confirmed and agreed, and so things will change on this. So it's just you being aware that these are the assumptions that are in there. They may not be right. They're the best guess that we've got at the moment. We may have to, if we think of anything that's specifically changed, that we will let you know about updating those assumptions. But it's just worth, you need to be aware that they're in there and be happy with them, and your governors and need to be happy that that's what's being assumed, because there is uncertainty there. So things may not be exactly as is laid out in that model at the moment because we just don't know. So things may change. If anything fundamental changes, we will certainly give you instructions on how you can update that, if we get anything concrete. That may sometimes be in the form of a patch that will come out. I know certainly sometimes when people see lots of patches coming out on the planner, mostly when patches come out, it's because some of the underlying assumptions have changed. We try and get this planner out to you very early so that you can get prepared for next year, but by getting it out early, it means that things will change as we go through. So a lot of the patches that come out to you are just to change those underlying assumptions. Sometimes we do take the opportunity to correct things that haven't quite worked as well as they might do, or open things up that were sort of frustrating you as well. But a lot of the time it's really just changing those underlying assumptions and making sure that the calculations are a little bit more accurate, due to the changes that have happened since the planner was released. So that's just to give you a background of what's built in and what's planned. I'm just checking my time there. Very hard to see. Okay. So one thing I did want to talk to you about was surplus balances and unspent grants, because I know it's on a lot of your minds. I think it's probably the subject we're getting most phone calls on at the moment, about what will happen when we get to the end of the year and we've got more money than we thought we might have just because of the way things have worked. I know it's not a position that everybody's in, and some people will be thinking, really? It's very clear that this situation has affected different schools in different ways, and it will very much depend on how many children you've got in during lockdown and that kind of thing, as to how much you can see any savings from a lockdown situation. It so differs across the board. So I think I speak generally, and I know it's a concern for some and not for others. So I just thought I'd just give a general view on it, so you all get the same kind of answer. If you are in a situation where you're carrying forward significant amounts of money, now we've obviously got in the back of our heads all the time that there's a sort of we have a process called the control of surplus balances, which the local authority is obliged to sort of keep a check on schools' balances, and if a school consistently carries over large amounts of money, we've got an obligation to make sure that money that is being spent on the pupils in the school for the year that it's been awarded. So there is a check on that, And that check sort of kicks in if we see that a school is consistently carrying forward over 8% for primaries or 5% for secondaries, year on year, carrying that forward consistently. Now, the main thing we need to know at that point is what is this percent? This can we're very aware that carry forward can be for a myriad of reasons. There can be all sorts of things wrapped up in that surplus, and it's not just as simple as, oh, you've got lots of money left to spend. Just isn't the case. There's most of the money that you're carrying forward, a lot of it is already accounted for. It has to be spent in very specific ways, and it's not just as simple as, look how much money schools have got. So we have been very aware of that, particularly over the last couple of years, because there's just been bubblings around and mentionings of schools' balances and some kind of consternation about, well, schools are telling us they haven't got any money, and then they've got these large balances, and so we're just getting those rumblings, and so therefore we've put in place this system where we've asked you to give us a clear analysis of your balance, which tell us what you're holding this money for, what is accounted for in your balance, and that is very much so that we've got the evidence if anyone should question this ever at any point, and if there's ever any rumblings about it, that we can say, look, these are the balances that schools are carrying forward, and this is why. And it's just really useful whenever these conversations come up to have real bona fide evidence of what's actually happening, rather than what the bigger picture might appear to be. So that's why we do it. So I would urge you to understand what your balance is. Understand how much of that is ring-fenced funds, because this is slightly different. I know we've had lots of phone calls, like I was saying, around the catch-up grants and will you claw it back? I certainly won't be clawing it back personally. It's a grant that's been given to you from the DfE with certain conditions attached, and so we need to understand how much of the money that you're carrying forward is attached to specific ring-fence grants that have their own conditions, and they may have their own clawback amounts attached to them. They may not. It's very rare for grants to be clawed back, I have to say, because generally they're given for a reason. However, there is also a protection of public money. If a grant is given for a reason and it's not used for that reason, then it is only the right thing to do that it's reallocated. So there are aspects of governance here that have to be taken into account. However, it's not in anybody's interest really to give out money and take it back. The administration alone is not efficient. So understand how much of those balances are ring-fence grants that you have not got the option to spend on anything you want. They may well be committed to spend at some point in the future. You may also have other monies that aren't ring-fence grants, but they are very much committed to spending in the future. Right at the end of the year, you may have actually, put orders in for things, for fairly substantial things, but that you've not had them in yet. They've not been delivered. Therefore, they don't rightly sit in your accounts for the current year. But they'll be spent next week. So it's worth understanding that you may well have £10,000 sitting here now, but actually we've ordered some laptops and they'll be in just in April, and so therefore that £10,000 is kind of gone already. So it's worth understanding, even though we still have that money, it is actually already spent. Really, it's committed. How much is a planned project contribution? There's an awful lot of big capital projects going on, and a lot of which have been delayed as well because of the situation we're in, and that's a very real thing that people are holding money for, and we need to understand how much is held there. I really urge you to make sure that these discussions are had openly. Your governors are very well aware of balances, and this is all minuted. That's the evidence we will ask for when we want to see if schools are discussing their balances and what's making up their balances. We will be asking for your governor minutes. Like I say, that balance analysis form, we're going to send you out a draft of that with your year-end documents so that you can get a feel for it. The final one we will ask you to return to us as part of your year-end certificate in April, but the balance analysis form will get you started. The draft one will get you started thinking about it and really understanding what that balance is that you're holding. I've talked about the ring-fence grants, and if they have any specific conditions. Like I say, I've got no indication that anyone's clawing anything back at the moment, but you just need to be aware that if there are grants that are for specific reasons, that you know where they're sitting and where you're spending them. The reserves, I would say that, certainly balances are under scrutiny in so much as lots of the COVID grants that have come out have referred to schools' balances and not claiming them if they've got certain level of reserves. So there's certainly a little, there's a nod to that we are not expecting schools to be claiming where there's where they have reserves that they can meet. They can redirect funds to other places. So there's certainly just a sort of a sense that is being looked at. So that's all of the detail I had to say today. I'm going to say thank you again because I can't say it enough. I think it's really, it doesn't go far enough, but thank you for all the hard work you're putting in. And I'm putting those pictures up again, just in case the universe didn't get the hint last time. This is what we want more of in 2021, please. Thank you.